Hey gang, got a great question today from someone asking about supplementing with Betaine HCL, which is like a supplemental form of stomach acid to help acidify your food better, and wanting to know, is that going to burn my throat or not? So let's dig into this a little bit.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So Karen sent in a message saying, hey, just found your channel and I may have IBS or SIBO, but I do have GERD or acid reflux. I see you use HCL. We hear it burns your throat when taking the pills to increase stomach acid. What is another way to increase stomach acid? Makes no sense to take Betaine HCL if pills are going to burn your throat. Am I right? Please tell us millions. So I don't know if Karen has millions of people in her house or she wants me to tell her millions of things. But keep in mind that I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving anybody medical advice here. I don't know Karen. I'm certainly not giving Karen any advice. But we can talk about some of these things in generalities a little bit. So the first thing that's important to understand is that in chapter 3 of my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, which if you have not read that, I'll put a link in the description below so you can get that whole book totally for free. And then you can jump to chapters 3 and 4 where we talk about improving some digestive malfunctions. And we talk about that it's very important to take Betaine HCL capsules in the middle of a meal. Like not on an empty stomach and maybe you forget and then I haven't eaten yet and my cat threw up and I'm cleaning that up and so I haven't eaten, and then the HCL in the stomach can create some discomfort without food in there. But we also want to chase those capsules with at least a bite of food or so to make sure that the capsules aren't going to get stuck in our esophagus and then dissolve there. If they dissolve in your esophagus, it's going to feel like heartburn because there's going to be hydrochloric acid there in your esophagus where it really doesn't belong. So we just like to see people take their HCL in the middle of their meal. So that can be one important aspect. But the next thing that we need to understand when we're looking at is Betaine HCL capsules going to burn my throat or burn my esophagus or give me magnified reflux issues, is we need to understand what actually creates reflux in the first place. What makes acid come back up and burn our throat? And in most cases, it's going to be a lack of stomach acid. It's not too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. There's this valve at the bottom of the esophagus called a lower esophageal sphincter that opens to let food come in, and then once that food is acidifying, that valve is supposed to close so this food doesn't come back up and burn us. The problem is that valve is triggered by stomach acid. So if someone just has a small amount of stomach acid in their stomach, but not enough to trigger that valve to close, well, then the small amount they have is going to come back up and burn them. So when we're looking at supplementing with HCL, when a person first starts supplementing with HCL, I'll put some links to a study in the description below this video that talks about how the best way to supplement with HCL is to start with 1 capsule and then increase each meal by 1 capsule until you get to the dose where it feels like you're digesting your food better. We don't suggest that. We suggest that people only go up to 5 because that's about the equivalent of what the human body would make on its own, is about 5 HCL capsules, if each of those capsules is about 500 milligrams per capsule. So some of them can vary. You might have to pay attention to that. But that's what most people say to do, is increase by 1, because you don't know how much stomach acid your body is making. So you don't want to just start off with 5. That may be way too much and create some discomfort or even some loose stool issues. But when a person first starts taking HCL, they would just take 1. So now, if they just put a small amount of acid in there, but it's not yet enough to trigger that LES valve to close, well, now they just increased the amount of acid in the stomach that's going to come back up and burn them. So they're going to say, oh man, these pills come up and burn your throat. Why would you take those? That's the stupidest thing I've ever done. But the reality was they just needed to acidify their stomach more, enough to trigger that valve to close. So that's where we get this misconception that HCL pills come back up and burn you. That's not really what's happening. If your stomach was making more stomach acid, that would come up and burn you even without the HCL pills. So it's really about just having a small amount of acid in the stomach, but not enough to trigger that valve to close. So when most people work up to that full dose of, say, 5 HCL, and I'm not telling you to take 5 HCL, this is just what we hear from people that works really well. When they get up to a dose that's enough to trigger that valve to close, then their reflux symptoms just stop because now the body's working the way that the body is supposed to work. Now, some more confusion can come in because someone can get up to a full dose and it's still not triggering that valve to close. And a person might have a hiatal hernia that's restricting that valve from closing correctly. That's one possibility. But the most common issue is that someone will have some type of bacterial overgrowth in the stomach where bacteria really shouldn't be. And a lot of times that bacteria will put out an alkaline waste. So when you're putting HCl in there, this alkaline waste from this bacteria is neutralizing the acid that you're putting in. So 5 pills might be only as effective as 1 or even none. Now, that doesn't mean, oh, well, I should take a whole lot more HCl capsules. The better step is to actually wipe out that bacteria a little bit, to take steps to reduce that overgrowth. So now when you're putting HCl in the stomach, it will acidify the stomach the way that it's supposed to. And then in a lot of cases, now the body can actually break down the food that you're eating, get minerals and other nutrients out of that food, and then supply the bodies with the minerals and nutrients it needs to make more of its own HCl. Now, there's other things that can restrict HCl production, but in most cases, it seems to be a lack of the nutrients needed for the body to make that. So then when a person starts to make more of their own HCl, they can then reduce the amount that they're supplementing with. Another step that can help when a person is first starting out is to not have a lot of carbs or sugars with that meal when you're first testing out using this HCl, because those carbs and sugars can activate bacteria that would be in the stomach, and then when they're activated, they create more gases, and those gases create more pressure in the stomach, and that pressure pushes more of that acid up. So that doesn't mean that a person can't have carbs when they're supplementing with HCl, but when first testing things out, just to make sure you're not going to have magnified reflux when you put a little more acid in there, or a person might not have reflux at all, and when they start using Betaine HCl, they'll have reflux, and they'll be like, oh man, this gives me reflux, but it was really that they had no stomach acid, probably because it was all being neutralized by this bacterial overgrowth, so when they put a little bit in there, now that small amount came back up and burned them. We also talk in chapter 3 of my book that it's also important to make sure a person's bile is flowing correctly so that the bile can come and neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. That can kind of trigger this bicarb to come out of the pancreas as well. So we want all those functions working correctly. And if you're not sure, we'll put a link in the description to our video for 10 signs of poor bile flow so you know whether you need to put steps into fixing that side of digestion as well. But when a person is saying, oh, what's an alternative to acidify my stomach better than using Betaine HCl? Well, a person could use apple cider vinegar. That's one option that can help some people if they just need a little bit of a boost, but it doesn't acidify the stomach anywhere near as much as Betaine HCl. So if someone has a significant problem, apple cider vinegar is not going to be enough to solve that. And plus, when you're using that acid is going down your throat and irritating that lining. So it's not as acidic as HCl, but if somebody's esophagus is already inflamed because they've had reflux for a long time, the apple cider vinegar can really burn going down. But more importantly, it's important to understand that if you're using whatever step you are to help the stomach acidify more, it has the ability to magnify reflux symptoms when you first start. When the body's like, okay, I'm making just a little bit more stomach acid. When you increase it a little bit, but it's not enough yet to trigger that valve to close, well, now there's more acid to come back up. Like we use this digestive enzyme called digestozyme from empirical labs because it has things like zinc and other cofactors that the body needs to start making more of its own HCl. So if a person wanted to go that route where they just want to help their body make more of its own HCl, that's a much slower process, and it can help the body eventually start making more HCl if enough other things are going the right way too. But again, if it's just making a little bit more at a time, those symptoms are really going to be magnified, and the person's going to think, man, taking this gives me reflux. Well, it didn't give you reflux. It's just helping the body make a little bit more acid, and that increase in acid is going to increase any symptoms until it's enough acid to trigger the valve to close and stop the symptoms completely. So I hope that helps, and if you want to understand other symptoms that can come up, like if there's a bacterial overgrowth and you put this acid in there, you can jump over and check out our video on possible troubles when first starting Betaine HCl. I can't wait to hear about your results.